Skullclamp is a card that is loved by artifact, equipment, and token decks in Commander. The ability to turn cheap X1 creatures into card draw is a great way to get ahead. But before Skullclamp was beloved at the casual tables, it was loathed at the competitive level. Today, I want to look at the history of Skullclamp, what caused it to release in such a broken state, the effects it had on its format, and answer one simple question. Could Skullclamp be unbanned today? The development of Skullclamp is considered one of the very first times that Wizards R&D truly messed up. I'll be pulling a lot of information from the article Skullclamp We Hardly Knew Ye by Aaron Forsyth, which is a fascinating read on its own. So if you want to read the full article, I have it linked in the description below. Skullclamp was a card designed for Darksteel, the second set of the Mirrodin block. The set introduced us to Modular, which had creatures enter with +1/+1 counters on them and the ability to move the counters when they were destroyed. Indestructible through the Darksteel artifact cycle, which meant cards couldn't be destroyed through any means, and showed that affinity didn't just have to be for artifacts, with a cycle of golems that had affinity for different basic land types. It also gave us incredibly powerful cards such as Arcbound Ravager, Aether Vial, and unfortunately, Skullclamp. Early in its design, Skullclamp looked pretty innocuous and unplayable, but as design continued, it went through a few changes. Skullclamp's original design during development looked something like this. Game End Sweater, a 3-mana artifact equipment with Equip 2 and reads, when the equipped creature is put into the graveyard from play, draw 2 cards. So this card was pretty terrible, even in limited. It was an overcosted Aristocrats payoff at best, so a few changes to it were made. The next version of Skullclamp was this. Sack Sweater, a 3-mana artifact equipment with Equip 2 and reads, equipped creature gets +1/+2, and you can sacrifice the equipped creature to draw 2 cards. This version is obviously more powerful than the previous, and while the power and toughness boosts were nice, the design team felt that it wasn't very flavorful for an equipment to kill its wearer for card advantage. So, that effect was changed. The second effect got changed from a sack ability to, when equipped creature is put into the graveyard from play, draw 2 cards. After this, no one really messed with Skullclamp for a while, until one fateful meeting when the decision was made to push equipment cards. So, after this meeting, Skullclamp entered its third iteration. Thought Extractor, a 1-mana artifact equipment with Equip 1 and reads, equipped creature gets +1/+1, and when the equipped creature is put into a graveyard, draw 2 cards. So this card is pretty good and played really well in testing. But those of you following along with the article might be thinking, now hold on, wait. This should be the third iteration. The third iteration in the article is the Skullclamp that we've all come to know and tolerate. And that is true. However, in a 2016 Blogatog post, Mark Rosewater confirmed that Skullclamp was changed from +1/+1 to +1/-1 late into design. To quote Mark Rosewater himself, +1/+1 tested okay, so how could making it worse hurt? Fast forward a bit, and 5th Dawn is almost finished development. Aaron Forsyth is putting together the Nuts and Bolts theme deck, and throws Skullclamp in there as a cheap artifact to go along with it. As he tested out the deck, Skullclamp started to show its power. Matt Place whipped up an Elves deck utilizing Skullclamp and Wirewood Hivemaster. But things seemed to be under control. Goblin Sharpshooter and control decks were able to shut the door on it. Because of this testing, the design team didn't really pay much mind to Skullclamp. After all, it had answers. They then proceeded to print Trinket Mage, Steel Shaper's Gift, Krark Clan Ironworks, and Eternal Witness into 5th Dawn. Fast forward a bit more, and development begins on Kamigawa block. Aaron Forsyth tests a Beacon of Creation and Blasting Station combo deck. It had some mana dorks and ramp creatures, so he put in Fecundity and Skullclamp. Skullclamp's power began to show a little bit more. Unloading his hand and quickly refilling, rebuilding after board wipes. It was all due to Skullclamp. Then, Paul Sotosanti said the infamous words, "I'm gonna try Skullclamp in my Ravager deck." The design team's meta became completely warped by Skullclamp. Every deck that could run Skullclamp was running it. Everything. The design team meta deteriorated into Skullclamp versus decks that could beat Skullclamp. This, of course, is really bad, but design still has time to change or take Skullclamp out of the set, right? Well, by the time design realized that Skullclamp was a problem, Mirrodin had just released to the public, so it was too late. Darksteel was printed and getting ready to be sent out in just a couple months' time, so all they could do is sit there and watch. Bans were considered, but the team hoped that players could find counters to Skullclamp and the problem would solve itself. And find a solution the players did. If you can't beat them, join them. While Pro Tour Kobe only had 8 copies of Skullclamp in the top 8, everything fell apart afterwards. Just like in the design team meta, every deck that could run Skullclamp in Standard was running Skullclamp. Because of this, 3 decks rose to the top. Goblins was a powerful Typal sacrifice deck. The deck was powered by Skirk Prospector, which allowed the deck to sacrifice its goblins to turbo into bigger threats. Some versions would even splash for Patriarch's bidding, bringing all their sacked goblins back for another round. The deck could dish out combat damage quickly and then utilize ability damage to give itself reach and push in the last damage. And, of course, the deck ran 4 Skullclamp. Sacrificing a goblin to Clickslither or Slitter with Skullclamp equipped is an easy way to get a draw engine online. And that's not even mentioning Skirk Prospector. Every goblin sacrificed by Skirk Prospector with Skullclamp equipped drew 2 cards and gives you the mana to re-equip Skullclamp. Elf and Nail was a Tooth and Nail combo deck utilizing an Elf engine to ramp into mana incredibly quickly. An Entwined Tooth and Nail grabbed Darksteel Colossus and Kamal, Fist of Krosa, and could slam into their opponents from there. The deck ran Mana Dorks, 1/1 Elves that ramped, Triskelion is an answer to all the 1/1s roaming around, and of course, 4 Skullclamp. The deck built itself around Dorks and Elves that could be sacrificed to Clamp, allowing the deck to churn through incredibly quickly to find its combo. Finally, the boogeyman of the format, Affinity. This was the deck to beat in this standard environment, and every deck was running some sort of main deck artifact hate to beat it. Similar to Goblins, this deck was a sacrifice deck with artifact synergies. Arcbound Ravager could sacrifice your artifacts at instant speed to buff it up, and could even sacrifice itself to put the counters on another artifact creature to dodge removal. Alongside Atog and Disciple of the Vault, the deck could easily go for a massive drain turn to finish off an opponent. And while the deck utilized Thirst for Knowledge and Thoughtcast, it, of course, used Skullclamp. It was card draw on an artifact, it triggered Disciple of the Vault, or could clamp unneeded extras, and could be sacrificed itself in a pinch. Counters were put into any deck attempting to beat Clamp. Damping Matrix was the biggest one, which hosed not just Skullclamp, but also any non-mana artifact or creature ability. Board wipes were a great way to delay Clamp decks, but control decks would go a step further and run March of the Machines, mainly as a way to hose artifact lands by making them 0/0 creatures, but with the added bonus of making Skullclamp die to creature removal. Mainboard Viridian Shaman cropped up in multiple green decks as a way to blow up any artifact. And we can't forget late-stage anti-Clamp, green-white control. 4 Achroma's Vengeance, 4 Wrath of God, 3 Wing Shards, 11 ways to blow up boards. 4 main deck Oxidize. These could catch any artifact, but notably hits the best way to rebuild after a wipe. This isn't even mentioning the effect that Skullclamp had on Block Constructed, but Mirrodin Block Constructed is such a big topic that it's best left for another day. Damping Matrix wasn't enough. Main deck artifact hate wasn't enough. And even if it was, the format had completely warped around Skullclamp. Something had to be done. On June 1st, 2004, Wizards announced the banning of Skullclamp in both Standard and Mirrodin Block Constructed. It didn't last much longer in Extended or Legacy, getting banned in those formats just 3 months later in September 2004. At Modern's inception, Skullclamp was on the preliminary ban list, and it has never come off that list. Which begs the question, could Skullclamp be unbanned in Modern today? What? No. No, absolutely not. The format would completely warp around Skullclamp like it did 20 years ago. Alright, sure. Maybe you're truly insane, or maybe you've just never really played with Skullclamp, so let me give an example. Let's take Boros or Mardu Energy. Can you imagine letting the energy decks clamp their Orc Army token, or their Ocelot Pride Cat tokens? Goblin Bombardment is being used as a way to give reach to the deck, now it's also a draw to. And Skullclamp can flip a Johnny on its own. Some people have been grumbling about Orcish Bowmasters in Modern for a while now, but now it's not only one of the best counters to the One Ring, but also Skullclamp. And it's a Skullclamp enabler. And this is just an example of a current top Modern deck. If you introduce Skullclamp into any format, a card that grinds X1s into 2 cards, decks are going to warp around that card. While Modern has a lot of cheap removal, you still have to rely on drawing that removal to get rid of the Skullclamp. Even one successful activation will put you so far behind your opponent, and it can be found off Urza's Saga. So no, Skullclamp cannot be unbanned in Modern. It cannot be unbanned in Legacy or printed into Standard or Pioneer. And I truly shudder to think of the day when a format is in a state that Skullclamp unbanning or printing is considered fine. Skullclamp is a design mistake that ruined both a block-constructed and Standard environment. Because of this, it was banned in Modern on the preliminary list, never seeing the light of day in the format. Due to its insane power, stupidly easy inclusion, and format warping abilities, we can safely say that, at the time of recording, Skullclamp will never be unbanned in Modern or Legacy or printed into Standard or Pioneer anytime soon. And with that, the book is closed on the legacy of this broken card once more.